Hello, welcome on board. Our subject for highlight this hour is transparency in the multilateral trading system. Transparency is one of the basic principles in the multilateral trading system. The principle of transparency requires that a country's policies and regulations affecting foreign or international trade should be communicated to all other members. For example, if country Alpha wants to enforce or intends to enforce a measure affecting importation of fridges, it would have to communicate this to all members through the WTO Secretariat based on the procedure outlined in the relevant agreement. The Secretariat has a recommended template to do this. In the WTO, transparency obligations allow for members' regulations and practices to be monitored and also their impact on the multilateral trading system. Transparency is very useful. It is very important to all members in the sense that it helps in enhancing the clarity and predictability in trade. That is, actors know what others are doing and they comply accordingly. Predictability in market opening commitment is also very useful for investment and job creation. Another usefulness of transparency is the fact that it also helps to enhance or it helps to reduce trade disruptions. That is, goods and services are able to move freely and relatively efficient and effectively. Transparency also helps to reduce trade disputes because problems get to be solved through dialogue, through warnings, through red flags, and other mediums without necessarily calling for panel hearing. It is also worth noting that transparency is very useful because it helps to improve the accountability and responsiveness of the regulatory systems. Transparency obligations are outlined in all the WTO agreements covering all the three main core areas of trade. That is trade in goods, trade in services, and trade in intellectual property. The basic provisions covering transparency in these core areas are Article 10 of the GATT 1994 Trade in Goods and other provisions in the multilateral trade in goods. We can also talk of Article 3 of the Trade in Services Agreement, that is the GATT, and trade in intellectual property right. Transparency provisions can be seen in Article 63. To achieve its objectives, WTO has in place two main mechanisms of transparency, or two main tools of enhancing or enforcing its transparency. That is the notification system, which allows members to regularly submit to the WTO Secretariat and to all members the policies and the measures that they have in place. This may be done in every 6 months, every year, or every other year, depending on the related agreement. There may also be tailor-made submissions based on actions being held by some members. The next transparency mechanism obligation is the trade policy review mechanism, which also allows members' national trade policies to be reviewed within a particular frequency. The frequency of the review is in 3 bands or 3 categories. The first category is 2 years. Every 2 years, those countries' national trade policies are reviewed. The review is dependent on the size and the share of the world trade that the member holds. So the first band, which is for every 2 years, is for 4 main bigger trading countries. That is China, Japan, EU, and the US. The second band is 4 years, which is for the next 16 major countries. And then the third category is all other countries, which is for 6 years. There may also be a longer cycle for countries depending on certain circumstances, but it's mostly LDCs. It is worth noting that effective from 1st January 2019, the cycle has been amended to 3, 5, and 7 respectively. Thank you very much for your audience. If you want to have more information about transparency obligations, kindly consult the WTO website, relevant publications of the WTO, and also the e-learning unit.